Story 1. Sticky notes. The scientists at 3M were working on a stronger glue but inadvertently ended up with the light, sticky glue we know that holds the papers together. They engineered the pads we know now after the fact as a way of using the glue. Story 2. The text you provided does not contain any acronyms to replace or explicit spelling errors to correct. However, I have made adjustments to fit the guidelines for Azure Text-to-Speak AI, including removing special characters and the link as requested. Here is the revised text. The fuzz pedal for guitars. A bass was plugged into a mixing board with a bad channel strip, causing a harsh buzzing sound. They couldn't hear it during the recording, but when they played it back, they decided they liked it, so they kept the take. When they repaired the board, they asked the technician to draw up a schematic of the malfunction and then rebuild it in a box. Story 3. Ivory soap floats because of an accident, sort of. As they were making a batch, someone forgot to turn off the mixer before everyone left for lunch. Agitating it longer trapped more air bubbles into the mix when it was pressed or poured into bars, making it buoyant. When it hit the market, customers reportedly went wild for floating soap. Apparently, at the time, there were still quite a few Americans who bathed in outdoor bodies of water. They were thrilled they didn't lose their soap when they inevitably dropped it. Story 4. Prussian Blue. A chemist named von Diesbach was trying to prepare a cochineal red, but his potash was contaminated with blood, which formed a strong blue pigment instead. Story 5. Frosted light bulbs. Light bulbs that are frosted disperse light better than a smooth glass bulb. However, if it is frosted on the outside, cleaning becomes a challenge as dust accumulates, and they were fragile. Therefore, they assigned an individual the task of figuring out how to make inside frosted light bulbs that weren't fragile. He conducted numerous experiments involving etching the inside of the bulb with acid. What he often did was perform a second etching with a weaker acid that would essentially reverse the previous etching so he could reuse samples. One day, while he was performing that second etching, he received a phone call and accidentally knocked the bulb onto the ground. Instead of shattering, it bounced. That is how he discovered that a short second etching would help prevent the brittleness. Story 6. Contacts. During the Battle of Britain, doctors discovered that pieces of plexiglass from shattered windscreens found in pilots' eyes did not cause infections. Story 7. Vulcanization of rubber, the process that modern tires are made from. Natural rubber was inadequate. Charles Goodyear was attempting to figure out a way to improve it. One day in 1839, while trying to mix rubber with sulfur, Goodyear accidentally dropped the mixture into a hot frying pan. To his astonishment, instead of melting further or vaporizing, the rubber remained firm and, as he increased the heat, the rubber became harder. Story 8. Radar. A savvy individual noticed an unusual echo when airplanes flew in front of the receiver. Microwaves. An inventive person had an item in their pocket while standing in front of a microwave transmitter. They realized it was possible to cook something using the transmitter. Continuing with the trend, this next discovery wasn't so much invented as it was uncovered. Some experts from Bell Laboratories were experiencing issues with their microwave receiver. No matter where they aimed it in the sky, they encountered some peculiar background radiation, completely pervasive. It was significantly disrupting their experiments. This turned out to be the residual energy from the Big Bang. Story 9. Artificial sweeteners. I'm fuzzy on the details, but it was on their hand, and they licked their finger to turn a page in a book or something and noticed it was very sweet. Boom. Artificial sweetener. Story 10. Potato chips. A chef produced them as a joke when one of his restaurant's customers kept asking for thinner French fries. So he prepared a batch that was so thin he thought the customer would be annoyed. Instead, the customer was delighted, and potato chips were born. Story 11. Microwave ovens are a great example. They were invented when a scientist accidentally melted a chocolate bar in his pocket while working with radar technology. Story 12. Once, when we realized we didn't have burger buns, I took tortillas and wrapped the burger in it, then grilled it shut like a crunch wrap. Now, it's my partner's favorite way to have them. They prefer it over buns. Story 13. Teflon. While attempting to invent a non-toxic, non-flammable chlorofluorocarbon refrigerant, Plunkett discovered Teflon by using a canister of tetrafluoroethylene gas. When opened, a white, waxy powder fell out of the canister. Story 14. The drum sound on In the Air Tonight, which actually came from a Peter Gabriel song Phil Collins played on called Intruder, is iconic. They mic'd the drum set and added a noise gate to limit crosstalk between the toms. They left a room or talkback mic on and it created the reverb. Combining the reverb with the noise gate, we forever have the 80s drum sound. Story 15. Liquid paper. I'm not sure if it's an urban legend or not, but I always heard that it was invented by the mother of one of the monkeys. I've also heard that Post-it notes were an accident, and not from Romy and Michelle's high school reunion either. Story 16. Titanium bone implants. When Dr. Peringvar Brainmark was researching bone marrow, he used titanium tubes to examine live rabbit bones. He discovered they weren't rejected and fused with the bone. Eventually, he tried it for human denture implants. Story 17. Stainless steel. They were trying out different types of steel alloy and left a load of discarded pieces outside in the rain. Someone noticed that one piece didn't rust. Story 18. Ozempic and all its cousins, when used for weight loss, were not developed for this purpose but rather for type 2 diabetes. Interestingly, the weight loss effect is not nearly as pronounced in diabetics. Story 19. Chocolate chip cookies. In 1930, Ruth Wakefield made them by accident. While making a batch of chocolate cookies, she ran out of baker's chocolate. She decided to use a slab of semi-sweet chocolate, break it into pieces, and mix it into the dough, hoping it would melt into the mixture while it baked. But the pieces of chocolate stayed in place. Story 20. Pop rocks. The scientist was trying to invent powdered carbonated soda since Kool-Aid had taken off but couldn't quite manage it. I believe there was something close to a 20-year gap between inventing Pop Rocks and them actually being sold in stores. Story 21. Microwave ovens. The story says a microwave scientist noticed a candy bar in his shirt pocket had partially melted, and presto, the Amana Red Orange was born. Story 22. Teflon was discovered by Roy Plunkett. Plunkett and his assistant, Jack Reebok, were tasked with developing an alternative refrigerant and came up with tetrafluoroethylene, or TFE. They ended up making about 100 pounds of TFE and were faced with the dilemma of storing it all. They placed the TFE in small cylinders and froze them. When they later checked on the refrigerant, they found the cylinders effectively empty, even though they felt heavy enough that they should still have been full. They cut one open and found that the TFE had polymerized into a white, waxy powder, polytetrafluoroethylene, or PTFE resin. Story 23. A lot of fake sugar was made by scientists not washing their hands after a lab, tasting something sweet while they ate, and then proceeding to taste everything in their lab to find out what tasted sweet. Story 24. Penicillin. Imagine being a gigantic slob, coming back to your dirty apartment, and your half-eaten bologna sandwich has turned into the cure for cancer. Story 25. Not quite invented by mistake, but Viagra was originally developed for another medical condition, though I forget which one. The fact that it increased blood flow to the penis and thus facilitated erections was a byproduct. Story 26. The microwave oven. Supposedly, after World War II, a radar lab technician was doing his rounds, taking measurements of various equipment and recording things. For a snack, he had a chocolate bar, wrapped in paper back in those days, in his pocket but found it melted. Since he had a record of exactly what he had been doing, he got another chocolate bar, taped it to a yardstick, and repeated his path until he saw it melt. Science ensued, and then engineering, and now we have microwave ovens. Story 27. Velcro. Swiss engineer George de Mestral was inspired by burrs sticking to his dog's fur during a hike. He studied the burrs under a microscope, leading to the invention of Velcro, a versatile fastener used in countless applications. Story 28. Chocolate chip cookies were created by an American woman using a smashed chocolate bar to replace cocoa powder in a chocolate cookie recipe. Now, today, chocolate chip cookies are more popular than regular chocolate ones. Story 29. Viagra was intended to be a remedy for heartaches. During the tests, it was observed that it wasn't effective, leading researchers to consider ending their studies and requesting the return of the samples from the patients. However, some patients were reluctant to return the remaining units they hadn't used. Eventually, some of them revealed the truth about what was happening. Story 30. Wright was attempting to create an inexpensive substitute for synthetic rubber at the General Electric lab. In 1943, while working on an experiment, he accidentally dropped boric acid into silicone oil, and the result was a stretchy substance that was bouncier than rubber. Story 31. Laser eye vision was invented by accident. I had the procedure in 2007. Not like how it was discovered, but I did get it done. Story 32. The inventor was trying to create an explosive, but one night, he left a stirring spoon covered in the compound out to dry overnight by mistake. When he tried to scrape it off the next day, it ignited. Story 33. Teflon. Research into refrigerant formulas led to the discovery of one of the most useful compounds ever. Dr. Roy J. Plunkett was working with gases related to refrigerants. After checking a frozen, compressed sample of tetrafluoroethylene, he and his associates made an unexpected discovery. The sample had polymerized spontaneously into a white, waxy solid to form polytetrafluoroethylene. Dr. Plunkett was smart enough to test the solid white material instead of saying, "Well, that experiment was a bust." That's the difference between a good researcher and a great one. When the unexpected happens, they don't get rattled but say, "How can I turn this into a win?" Polytetrafluoroethylene is inert to virtually all chemicals and considered the most slippery material in existence, making it one of the most valuable, versatile technologies invented. Story 34. NutraSweet, allegedly, a chemist in one of the big companies told her assistant to test this, but he heard taste this. So he did and reported back on how sweet it was. Luckily, it didn't kill him because they were not working on food-related chemicals. Story 35. Depends. Do you mean by actual accident, or what was a failure of an invention that actually was perfect for something else? If actual accident, microwaves. Everyone knows the story about the chocolate bar in someone's back pocket that illustrates just how close they were to an unexpected outcome. If not, chainsaws. Research the original use for chainsaws. It's not what you think. Story 36. One I particularly appreciate is chocolate chip cookies. The most popular tale holds that Ruth Wakefield was trying to make chocolate cookies, but realized after having already started that she was out of baker's chocolate, and so decided to substitute a chopped bar of semi-sweet chocolate. The semi-sweet didn't melt through the cookie like Ruth expected, but rather remained as chunks in the batter. And so the classic cookie was born. Story 37. Potato chips. A chef became annoyed when a customer repeatedly returned his fries for being too thick. So he sliced them extremely thin out of spite. And just like that, chips were born. Story 38. Splenda was invented by a person who told his assistant to test this chemical. But the assistant thought he said, taste this chemical. Although Splenda is not that impressive and may cause diabetes, its origin story remains quite interesting. Normally, such a misunderstanding could have been fatal for the assistant. Story 39. This wasn't necessarily an accident, but the player versus player mode for Nintendo 64 GoldenEye was basically an afterthought. The original plan for the game didn't include a player versus player feature, and it was only included because it was something the developers were having fun with while they worked on the game. Arguably, Nintendo 64 GoldenEye is the progenitor of the entire first-person shooter player versus player genre. It accidentally revolutionized the gaming industry. Does that count? Story 40. Penicillin. In 1928, Dr. Alexander Fleming returned from a holiday to find mold growing on a petri dish of Staphylococcus bacteria. He noticed the mold seemed to be preventing the bacteria around it from growing. He soon identified that the mold produced a self-defense chemical that could kill bacteria. Story 41. The Weber grill was invented from the idea of the buoys produced by the company that were used to navigate the waterways. Story 42. Microwave ovens. A guy was experimenting with radar technology and accidentally melted a candy bar in his pocket. Next thing you know, we are all heating our leftovers in minutes. Thanks to a melted snack, we now have the magic of instant hot food. Story 43. Penicillin was invented by a scientist, Fleming I believe, who went away for a couple of weeks and left his dirty petri dishes around, presumably with some foodstuff in them. He came back to find that where there was mold, bacteria would not grow. He then harvested this mold and it became the first antibiotic, saving millions of lives and is still in use today. Story 44. Chocolate chip cookies. I forget the name of the lady who did it, but she was trying to make chocolate cookies but didn't have any powder. She cut up a chocolate bar into a bunch of pieces, thinking it would melt into the batter in the oven, and boom, everyone's default cookie was born. Story 45. Lysergic acid diethylamide. Perhaps not invented but discovered by accident. Dr. Albert Hoffman ingested it through his skin by accident and had the best bike ride of all time back to his house. Story 46. Cornflakes were made because someone forgot to put away the cereal that was being made at Dr. Kellogg's sanitarium. His brother decided to use that batch by rolling it out, making a thinner version of their famous cereal. In fact, the original recipe was stolen by a former employee, C.W. Post. He took that recipe to create what is considered the first commercial breakfast cereal, Grape Nuts. In fact, there were a lot of foods created by accident. I recently binged the series The Food That Built America on Hulu, and they covered a few. Story 47. Velcro. I believe the inventor was on a nature walk and got burrs stuck to his sweater. He noticed the little hooks on the burrs that were attached to the sweater threads.